Later that evening, she sat in her Washington office, the city skyline glowing faintly beyond the window. Her phone buzzed. A message from Jenna, her assistant. Jenna. Brookhaven PD just released a statement. Full cooperation with DHS. Officer Cole quoted you directly. Respect isn't given because of a title. It's earned through how you treat people. Alicia read the message twice, her lips curving into a faint, tired smile. She set the phone down and looked out over the Capitol. The lights reflected faintly in the glass. Bright, orderly, constant. She thought about the officers' faces when she had revealed her badge. The silence that followed. The look of realization, not fear, but recognition, that the person they had underestimated carried more than authority. She carried the weight of every time someone like her had to prove what should have already been seen. In her years of service, she'd learned that true justice wasn't only in the courtroom or the law. It lived in moments like those, when perception shifted, when respect found its way back into the room. Alicia closed her laptop, stood, and looked once more at the skyline. The city hummed beneath her, a network of people, systems, and stories woven together by trust or the lack of it. Tomorrow, there would be another meeting, another report, another crisis waiting for her. But tonight, she allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Change had started, not with force or confrontation, but with composure, the kind that made even a courtroom full of skeptics fall silent. And somewhere in a small town hundreds of miles away, a new standard was taking root, not written in law books or federal policy, but in the conscience of the people who had learned to look past their assumptions and see integrity for what it truly was. 2 months later, the Brookhaven case had become a quiet benchmark within the Department of Homeland Security. It wasn't the kind of story that made the evening news, but within government circles and small-town departments across the region, people were talking about it. The day a courtroom full of smirking officers fell silent because a woman they underestimated revealed she was the one auditing them. For Alicia Green, though the world had already moved forward, her work rarely slowed. She had returned to Washington, overseeing multiple regional audits and interagency security reviews. Her schedule was packed with briefings, meetings, and late-night calls. Yet Brookhaven remained in the back of her mind, not because of the embarrassment she caused, but because of what followed. On a grey Monday morning, Alicia sat in her office reviewing field reports when her assistant Jenna stepped in. "Ma'am, there's a visitor from Brookhaven here to see you." Alicia looked up, surprised. "Brookhaven?" "Yes, ma'am," Jenna said, smiling slightly. "Officer Cole," Alicia nodded. "Send him in." Moments later, Cole entered, dressed in plain clothes instead of his uniform. He looked more confident than the last time she'd seen him, carrying a manila envelope under his arm. "Ma'am," he said, shaking her hand. "It's good to see you again." "Likewise, officer," she said. "To what do I owe the visit?" He took a seat. "Actually, it's not official business. I came to give you something." He placed the envelope on her desk. Inside were photos from the Brookhaven Community Trust Program, a joint project between the police department and local schools. In one photo, Cole stood beside a small group of students holding certificates that read, "The Green Standard, Respect in Action." In another, a young woman in uniform was giving a presentation at the same courthouse where everything began. Alicia flipped through the pictures slowly. "You really followed through," Cole smiled. "We did. The department changed a lot after your visit. The officers involved in the falsified reports resigned. We've been rebuilding since then. But the real change came from how the younger officers started thinking about the job." He hesitated, then added, "That day in court, when you showed your badge, yeah, it shook everyone. But what stuck with me wasn't your title. It was what you said after. Respect isn't about authority, it's about how you treat people before you know who they are." That line made its way into every training session we run now. Alicia looked up, her eyes soft. "I'm glad to hear that." Cole leaned forward slightly. "You know, most people don't realize how hard it is to change a culture once it sets in. But that day, it was like someone turned on the light. People didn't want to admit it, but we needed that wake-up call." Alicia smiled faintly. "Sometimes a moment of discomfort is the beginning of discipline." He laughed quietly. "Yeah, I've been living that lesson ever since." They talked for a while longer. about community programs, new ethics courses, and the ripple effect small changes could have in towns like Brookhaven. Before leaving, Cole stood and said, "There's something else. The mayor's planning to invite you to speak at our annual leadership forum next month. It's about accountability and service. Thought I'd give you a heads up." Alicia tilted her head. "Are you sure your department's ready to see me again?" Cole grinned. "Ma'am, they're hoping you'll say yes." When he left, Alicia sat in silence for a moment, the photos still spread out on her desk. It wasn't often that her work brought visible results. Most of what she did stayed behind classified walls, invisible to the public. But this, seeing trust restored where cynicism once lived, felt meaningful in a different way. A week later, she accepted the invitation. The Brookhaven Leadership Forum was held in the same courthouse that had once housed tension and laughter. This time, though, it looked transformed. Fresh paint covered the walls, and new plaques lined the hallway. One of them inscribed with a simple quote, "Respect builds stronger institutions than fear ever will." DHS Director's Address, Brookhaven Case Review. When Alicia entered the courtroom, the audience rose in applause. The mayor introduced her with reverence. A woman whose leadership reminded us that integrity doesn't need to shout to be heard. She stepped up to the podium, the same space where she had once quietly dismantled a defense attorney's arrogance. But now the energy felt different, warm, expectant, genuine. "Good afternoon," she began. "I don't stand here as a federal director today, or as an investigator. I'm here as someone who believes that trust is built from the ground up. What happened in this room months ago wasn't just about a case. It was about perception, about the danger of assuming who someone is based on how they look, where they stand, or what title they don't announce." The crowd listened closely. "I've worked in national security for almost 15 years, she continued. "And I can tell you this. The biggest threat to any system isn't from the outside. It's from the moments when people stop holding themselves accountable. That's when integrity erodes. And once that's gone, no badge, no uniform, no title can save what's left." She paused, scanning the audience. "But accountability also has a starting point. It starts with listening." When she finished, the applause was steady and heartfelt. Officers, community leaders, and civilians alike stood as she stepped away from the podium. Afterward, several young recruits approached her shyly, asking questions about her work, about leadership, about what it meant to lead without being loud. She answered each with patience, encouraging them to think deeply before they acted. Outside the courthouse, Officer Cole stood by the steps, waiting. "You did it again," he said with a grin. "You've got everyone thinking." Alicia laughed softly. "That's the goal. Thinking beats assuming." As they stood there in the warm afternoon light, she looked out at the courthouse's stone pillars and the crowd dispersing across the square. The same building that once held arrogance and judgment now carried a new kind of weight, a symbol of what change could look like when humility met truth. Cole turned to her. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you ever get tired of having to prove yourself?" Alicia thought for a moment before replying. "No, because proving myself isn't for me, it's for the people watching who need to see what's possible." He nodded slowly. "That's what leadership looks like, isn't it?" "Not leadership," she said gently. "Service." As she left, the sound of her heels against the marble floor echoed through the courthouse one last time. Not sharp, not heavy, but steady. Outside, the late afternoon sun washed the building in gold. The laughter that had once filled it was gone, replaced by something quieter and stronger. It wasn't the sound of authority. It was the sound of respect finally taking root. Morning sunlight reflected off the glass facade of Helix Dynamics, one of the city's most rapidly growing tech firms. Inside, the air hummed with the quiet rhythm of innovation, rows of developers typing at glowing monitors, managers discussing timelines over coffee, and screens displaying endless strings of data. It was the kind of place where success felt constant and failure seemed unthinkable. But that illusion was about to break. At the top floor, Richard Hale, the CEO, stood in his sleek corner office overlooking the skyline. At 47, he was the image of composure, confident, sharply dressed, and used to being in control. His company had just secured a multi-million-dollar contract with a global logistics firm, one that depended entirely on their new software platform launching in less than 24 hours. Everything was on schedule, until the first alert hit. At first, it was a single red light blinking on the operations board in the monitoring room. Then another. Within minutes, every system display across the floor turned crimson. "Server failure detected," a voice called from the IT pit. "Primary node unresponsive." "Secondary is down too?" Another shouted. Within seconds, chaos replaced order. Alarms echoed through the glass-walled office as tech leads and engineers crowded around screens typing furiously. Files were missing, data was inaccessible, and the backup drive at the company's safety net refused to boot. Richard rushed into the control room, his calm cracking. "What's going on?" he demanded. The head of IT, Marcy Nguyen, looked pale. "The central system crashed, sir. We're locked out of our core database. It looks like a chain corruption. It's spreading through every node." "How long to fix it?" She hesitated. "We're not sure. Could be hours. Could be days." "Days?" Richard's voice rose, his composure slipping. "We have the client demo tomorrow. That platform is the deal. If we can't restore it—" "I know," she said quickly. "We're doing everything we can. But this isn't just a local error. Something in the architecture's broken deep. Like a recursive loop collapsing the whole structure." The engineers kept typing, frustration building. Code filled the screens, lines scrolling faster than anyone could read. Every time someone tried to reboot, the system threw up a new error. By noon, the office had gone quiet, not with calm, but with dread. Richard stood by the window, watching the city below. Every hour that passed meant millions in potential losses. His investors were calling, demanding updates. The PR team was drafting statements they prayed they wouldn't have to release. And yet, in the middle of the panic, one person continued to move quietly through the chaos: Maria Harris, the office cleaner. Maria had worked at Helix Dynamics for 5 years. She was steady, dependable, invisible in the way most janitorial staff were in corporate spaces, seen but rarely acknowledged. She moved silently from floor to floor, polishing glass walls and emptying bins, her uniform crisp and her expression calm. That afternoon, while she was cleaning the executive lounge, she paused outside the server room. The door was slightly open and voices drifted through. "This architecture doesn't make sense anymore," Marcy muttered. "It's like the core directory's rewriting itself." A younger technician groaned. "We'll need to rebuild from scratch." Weeks of work gone. Maria lingered for a moment, her brow furrowed. She didn't understand all the jargon, but she recognized panic when she heard it. Then she heard something else, a faint, familiar tune from her phone. She checked it and smiled faintly. It was a text from her son, Eli, a 17-year-old high school student. Eli. "Done with school early. Can I stop by?" "Got your spare keys, Maria?" "Sure, stay quiet if they're in meetings." Big day at the office. Eli was brilliant, though she rarely said that out loud. He'd been taking apart computers since he was 10, repairing old laptops from scrap parts, and teaching himself coding from online courses. Their apartment was filled with circuit boards and spare wires, his small desk glowing with the light of multiple monitors. An hour later, Eli arrived at the Helix building, wearing his school jacket and carrying a small backpack. Maria met him in the hallway, her voice low. "You can wait in the break room, okay? Everyone's working?" "Yeah, sure," he said, glancing toward the rows of glass offices. He could feel the tension even from the hallway. "Something's wrong." "They said the system broke," she whispered. "The computers, all of them." He tilted his head. "You mean like a crash?" She shrugged. "I don't know." They look worried. "Even the boss?" Eli peered down the hall toward the control room, where people stood around in silence. He could see the monitors flashing red, lines of error code scrolling non-stop. His curiosity sparked immediately. "Mom," he said softly, "can I just look?" "No," she said quickly. "This isn't school, Eli. These people work here." "You can't—" But before she could finish, Richard Hale's voice carried down the corridor. "Marcy, I don't care how complicated it is, just get me results." Maria flinched, stepping aside instinctively as Richard stormed out of the control room. His tie was loosened, his phone pressed to his ear, his composure long gone. "Yes, I understand that. But if we don't get the system back by tonight, there is no company." He ended the call and turned, realizing someone was standing nearby. "Maria," he said, forcing a strained smile. "Sorry, how long day?" "Yes, sir," she said softly. He sighed. "You shouldn't be here right now." "It's chaos." Eli stepped forward slightly. What happened? Richard blinked, noticing him for the first time. Who's this? My son Eli, Maria said quickly. He's just waiting for me, sir. The CEO nodded distractedly, rubbing his temple. Right. Well, it's best if you both stay clear of the tech rooms. We're in full lockdown. Yes, sir. As he walked away, Eli glanced past the open door into the control room. He could see the main console, screens filled with broken code, network maps tangled in flashing red lines. He recognized the architecture style from something he'd seen online, modular clusters linked by relational databases. Something about the error pattern caught his eye. Mom, he whispered, they're running a recursive chain. She frowned. English, please. He pointed toward the screens. The system's looping itself. If that's what's crashing, they're never going to fix it from the top level. Eli, she said in a warning tone, don't start. But it was too late. He was already stepping closer, his curiosity winning. Mom, I can fix it. Eli, she whispered sharply, you cannot walk in there and tell those people you can fix their $1 million system. He looked at her, eyes steady. Then they'll lose it. Inside, Marcy slammed a hand against the desk. None of this makes sense. Even the root override isn't responding. A junior engineer spoke up nervously. Maybe it's hardware. It's not, Eli said suddenly from the doorway. The room turned. Marcy blinked. Who are you? Eli hesitated only briefly. I'm Maria's son, but you're chasing the wrong thread. Richard, hearing the commotion, returned, his face tight. What is going on here? Marcy gestured toward Eli. This kid just walked in here saying, I know why your system's crashing, Eli said quickly. Your database nodes are referencing themselves in a closed call stack. It's recursive looping. Every time you reboot, you make it worse. Marcy stared. How do you even know that term? I've seen it, he said. Online architecture maps do the same thing when people build circular data references. You need to break the chain manually from a shadow root. That's not how our system, she began, but Richard interrupted. Marcy, wait. Can he be right? She hesitated, scanning the logs again. Her eyes widened. If he's right, that would explain the feedback loop. Richard turned to Eli. And you can fix it? Eli swallowed hard. If you let me try. The room went silent. No one moved. Richard looked at the boy, barely 17, standing among professionals twice his age, and saw something steady in his gaze. Not arrogance, focus. Do it, Richard said finally. Marcy stepped aside reluctantly as Eli moved to the main console. His fingers flew across the keyboard, faster than most had ever seen. He opened the architecture map, traced the network paths, and located the looping call stack. You built your failover on a mirrored function, he murmured. It's reflecting the same chain back to itself. What? Marcy said. He didn't answer, typing faster. Within seconds, lines of code scrolled by as he rewrote the override commands manually. The error alerts began to slow. Then, one by one, the red screens shifted to blue. Core node stable, an engineer said in disbelief. Secondary linked, another added. Primary restored. The final screen turned green. Silence filled the room again, this time not from fear but disbelief. Richard exhaled, eyes wide. I actually did it. Eli stepped back, wiping his hands on his jeans. Your recursive loop was self-referencing. You were fixing the surface, not the root. No one spoke for a moment. Then Marcy said softly, That's exactly right. Richard turned to Maria, who had been standing frozen by the door the entire time. Maria, he said quietly, your son just saved my company. She blinked, unsure what to say. He just likes computers. Richard smiled faintly, shaking his head. He doesn't like them. He understands them. The tension broke into murmurs of awe. Engineers approached Eli with questions, eager to understand what he'd done. Marcy just stared, speechless. Later that evening, when most of the staff had gone home, Richard found Maria cleaning the executive lounge. He approached quietly. I owe you both more than you know, he said. If your son's ever looking for an internship, Helix will take him. Maria smiled shyly. I'll tell him. As he walked away, she paused, glancing out toward the dimmed office floor where her son had stood hours earlier. For years, she'd worried that Eli's gift wouldn't matter in a world that rarely saw potential in kids like him. But tonight, under the glow of computer screens, he hadn't just fixed a system. He'd reminded everyone that brilliance doesn't always wear a badge or a title. Sometimes, Fad just walks in quietly, holding a backpack and a spark. The next morning, the entire Helix Dynamics building felt different. The usual buzz of confidence had returned, but this time it carried a quieter tone, one mixed with awe and humility. Engineers gathered in small clusters, still talking about what had happened the night before. Every conversation circled back to the same fact. The system that their best specialists couldn't save had been restored by a teenager, the cleaner's son. Richard Hale arrived early, coffee in hand, looking less like a CEO and more like a man still processing disbelief. He had barely slept. The company had been hours away from a total breakdown, and now somehow it was running smoother than before. When he reached the main floor, he found Marcy sitting at her station, reviewing the system logs. "Morning," he said. She turned to him, tired but smiling. "Morning, sir. You'll want to see this." On her screen, streams of green-coded messages scrolled smoothly. System health, performance, stability, all at peak levels. Not only did the reboot hold, she said, but the patch Eli wrote last night optimized the loop efficiency. "We're running 20% faster than before the crash." Richard blinked. "He optimized it too?" Marcy nodded. "The code structure he used, it's unconventional but brilliant. He built an internal safety fallback that even we didn't have. If this system ever tries to self-reference again, it'll correct itself automatically." He leaned closer, scanning the screen. "That kid saved this company twice in one night." Marcy gave a faint laugh. "I've already had 3 engineers ask me if we can hire him." Richard smiled slightly. "Let's make that official." By mid-morning, the staff had gathered in the main lounge for a brief meeting. The tension of yesterday had melted into something else: gratitude, curiosity, and a quiet sense of amazement. When Maria arrived pushing her cleaning cart, every head turned. People she'd walked past for years without a second glance now greeted her with respect. Richard spotted her and gestured for her to join him. She hesitated. "Sir, I can come back later." "No," he said kindly. "You and your son deserve a moment." Eli stood beside her, looking both shy and overwhelmed. He had on the same school jacket from yesterday, his backpack slung over one shoulder. The employees murmured among themselves, whispering things like, "That's the kid." And "He's the one who fixed it." Richard cleared his throat. "Everyone," he said, "I think we all know why we're here. Yesterday, we faced the biggest system failure in this company's history. We tried everything, every method, every strategy. Nothing worked. And then, out of nowhere, someone who wasn't even on our payroll stepped in and solved what our top engineers couldn't." He turned to Eli, smiling. That someone was Eli Harris. A small ripple of applause began, soft at first, then growing stronger until the entire room joined in. Eli's face flushed red as he tried not to smile. Maria covered her mouth, overwhelmed. Richard continued. "Eli didn't just fix a problem. He reminded us that talent doesn't care about titles or job descriptions. It can come from anywhere, and sometimes it's standing right in front of us when we least expect it." He turned to Maria. "And to Maria, thank you. You've worked here for years, quietly keeping this place running in ways most of us never see. Yesterday your son saved our systems, but you've been keeping our people steady all along." Maria blinked back tears, whispering, "Thank you, sir." When the applause faded, Richard reached into his pocket and pulled out a small badge. "Eli," he said, "this company runs an internship program every summer. Usually it's for college students, but I think we can make an exception." Eli's eyes widened. "You mean—" "You're hired," Richard said, "as a junior systems apprentice. Effective immediately." The room broke into another round of applause. Eli looked up at his mother, speechless. Maria smiled proudly and whispered, "Say thank you." He nodded, clearing his throat. "Thank you, sir. I don't know what to say." "Just keep doing what you did yesterday," Richard said. "Stay curious." The rest of the day moved quickly. Reporters from local tech journals began calling, asking for statements about the near disaster and the young prodigy who had prevented it. Richard handled the press carefully, refusing to make it a spectacle. "We had a system error," he told them simply, "and a young mind reminded us that innovation isn't about status. It's about insight." That evening, as the office emptied and the city lights flickered on, Richard found himself standing by the window again, staring out at the skyline. He thought about how close he'd come to losing everything, and how unlikely the solution had been. Downstairs, Maria and Eli were packing up for the day. She watched him as he carefully organized his new badge into his backpack. "You really did it," she said softly. "You saved their company." Eli smiled faintly. "I just saw something they didn't." "You've always seen things differently," she said. "Since you were little." They stepped into the elevator together. The hum of the machinery filled the silence between them. Maria looked at her reflection in the polished doors, and then at her son. "You know," she said quietly, "people didn't look at us much before. Today everyone looked." Eli thought for a moment before replying, "Maybe next time they'll see." Maria smiled gently. "You think so?" He nodded. "Yeah, people notice what surprises them. But if they remember it, maybe that changes something." When they reached the ground floor, the security guard at the front desk gave them both a respectful nod. "Evening, Mr. Harris, Mrs. Harris." Maria blinked, almost laughing. "Good night, Tony." They stepped outside into the cool evening air. The building glowed behind them, tall and silver, its reflection stretching across the wet pavement. Maria looked up at it and exhaled. "I used to think that place would always belong to people like him," she said softly, glancing upward. "The ones with suits, meetings, titles." Eli looked at her, a small smile forming. "It still does," he said. "But now it belongs to us a little too." She reached for his hand and squeezed it. "You're going to do great things, Eli." "I'll try," he said. "You already did." As they walked toward the subway, the nightlights flickered across the glass buildings. The city, alive and constant, seemed to hum with quiet possibility. Somewhere high above them, the servers Eli had saved whirred steadily, stable, efficient, alive. And for the first time in her years of working at Helix Dynamics, Maria didn't feel like she was walking away from the company. She felt like she was part of it, not because of who she worked for, but because of who she had raised. The next few weeks transformed life for both Eli and his mother in ways neither of them had expected. Helix Dynamics had quickly integrated Eli into the technical department. At first, the employees weren't sure what to make of a 17-year-old in their workspace. Some found it amusing, others humbling. But within a few days, his quiet presence and unassuming confidence started to earn respect. Eli didn't try to impress anyone. He simply worked. He asked smart questions, stayed late, and helped solve problems that had lingered unsolved for months. Richard Hale, the CEO, often stopped by to check on his progress. One afternoon, he leaned against the doorway of the server lab, watching Eli rewire a network patch manually. "You're not like most interns I've seen," he said. Eli looked up briefly. "I just like figuring things out." "That's the part I envy," Richard admitted. "When you've been running a company for years, you start seeing numbers and meetings instead of problems to solve. You reminded me what it looks like to actually think." Eli smiled shyly. "You fix things too, though." "You just fix people." That made Richard laugh. "Touché, kid, touché." Meanwhile, Maria noticed the shift in how people treated her. The same managers who used to nod politely and hurry past now stopped to greet her warmly, sometimes even chatting for a few minutes. She wasn't used to that kind of attention, and part of her didn't know what to do with it. One afternoon, as she wiped down the glass tables in the executive lounge, Marcy from IT came in carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Maria," she said warmly, "you don't have to clean in here right now. We're having a team meeting." "It's fine," Maria said with a smile. "I'll be quick." Marcy hesitated, then placed one of the cups on the counter. "For you," she said. Maria blinked. "Oh, that's all right. I can't, please," Marcy insisted. "It's just coffee. A small thank you for raising someone who might actually be smarter than all of us combined." Maria laughed softly, taking the cup. "He's been that way since he was little. Always fixing things he wasn't supposed to touch." Marcy smiled. "Well, he touched this company in a good way." That night, as mother and son rode home together on the subway, Maria looked at him thoughtfully. "You've changed things, Eli." He glanced up from his laptop. "I just did what I could." "You did more than that," she said. "You made them see you." He looked out the window, watching the tunnel lights blur past. "Maybe," he said quietly, "but I don't want to just be the kid who fixed the servers. I want to build something that doesn't break so easily." Maria nodded, understanding more than he realized. "Then you will." A few days later, Eli was invited to sit in on a meeting about a new security architecture for Helix's next major product. The room was filled with senior engineers and executives. Richard introduced him with pride. "This is Eli Harris, our systems apprentice. Some of you already know he saved us during the last crash. I've asked him to give his thoughts on the new build." Eli stood at the end of the long glass table, laptop in hand, his heart racing. He wasn't used to speaking in front of so many people, especially not professionals decades older than him. But when he began explaining his proposal, how the system should mirror itself across multiple adaptive clusters instead of relying on static backups, the room went silent. When he finished, Marcy looked impressed. "You're saying each node should learn from the others in real time?" Eli nodded. "Exactly. The system should be self-correcting. That way no single crash can take it all down again." Richard folded his arms, smiling. "Like a digital immune system." Eli grinned. "Yeah, something like that." When the meeting ended, Richard pulled him aside. "You realize this could change the way we design infrastructure from the ground up." "I just don't want another crash," Eli said. Richard chuckled. "That's how most great ideas start." That night, back in their small apartment, Maria made Eli his favorite dinner, baked chicken with garlic rice. The small kitchen smelled warm and familiar, a world away from the steel and glass of Helix Dynamics. As they ate, she said quietly, "You know, Mr. Hale called me today." Eli looked up, startled. "He did?" She nodded. "He said they're naming your new project eGuard." He blinked. "They're naming it after me?" "He said it was your design. Said you deserved the credit." Eli was quiet for a moment, then smiled. "That's crazy." "No," she said softly. "That's justice." He looked down at his plate, trying to hide his grin. "You're proud, huh?" She laughed lightly. "More than I can say. But promise me something. Anything. Don't ever forget where you started, or who you are. Some people will see your talent. Some won't. But your worth doesn't depend on their eyes." He nodded slowly. "I know, Mum." The following week, Richard hosted a company gathering to unveil eGuard. The presentation was streamed live to clients and partners, showcasing Helix Dynamics' new self-healing infrastructure system. When Richard took the stage, he began by telling the story of the crisis that had nearly ended the company, and the teenager who had saved it. He gestured toward Eli, who stood awkwardly at the side of the stage. "Sometimes brilliance doesn't come from a boardroom or a lab," Richard said. "Sometimes it comes from the quietest corners, where people work hard without being seen." Eli Harris reminded us that innovation has no uniform. It just needs a chance to be heard. The room erupted in applause. Maria, standing near the back with the staff, felt her chest tighten with pride. For once, she didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel like a background figure in a world built for others. Her son was on that stage because of who he was, and she had been part of that journey every step of the way. After the event, as people congratulated Eli and shook his hand, he spotted his mother in the crowd. Their eyes met across the room, a silent exchange that said everything. She didn't need to speak to tell him she was proud. He didn't need to say anything to tell her he knew. Later, as the lights dimmed and the last of the guests left, Richard approached them both. "Eli," he said, "you're the kind of person this company was built for, people who see solutions where others see walls." Then he looked at Maria. "And you're the reason he's that kind of person." She smiled. "He just needed someone to let him try," Richard nodded. "And now that he's started, I don't think anyone can stop him." That night, as they rode home again, the city lights flickered through the subway windows. Maria rested her head on her son's shoulder, tired but content. "You've done a lot in 1 month," she said softly. He smiled. "It's just the beginning." And she believed him. Because sometimes the smallest victories, a line of code fixed, a moment of trust earned, were just the start of something that would ripple far beyond what anyone in that office could see. By the time summer arrived, Helix Dynamics had changed completely. The company that had once run on tight schedules and quiet competition now felt like a place alive with collaboration and curiosity. The crisis that had nearly destroyed it had instead become a story of transformation, one centered not on failure, but on a spark of brilliance that came from somewhere no one expected. Eli Harris, the Maid's teenage son, had become the company's quiet symbol of renewal. He wasn't treated like a prodigy or a trophy. He was treated like part of the team. His humility and quiet intelligence had disarmed everyone who once doubted him. He still took the subway to work each morning, still wore the same jacket, still helped his mother with groceries on weekends. But at Helix, his presence carried weight. Engineers who had been in the field for decades now came to him for advice, and he treated every question with patience and sincerity. One afternoon, Richard Hale invited him up to the top floor, his office with the panoramic view of the skyline. When Eli walked in, Richard was standing by the window, hands in his pockets. "Close the door, kid," he said with a grin. "You've earned a seat at the big table today." Eli laughed softly and sat down. "What's going on?" Richard turned, his expression thoughtful. "We just closed the deal with Global Freight. The eGuard system went live yesterday. 0 crashes, 0 vulnerabilities. They said it's the most stable infrastructure they've ever used." Eli smiled. "That's good news." "It's better than good," Richard said. "It means this company is alive because of you. And I don't mean just the servers. You changed the culture here." Eli looked down modestly. "I just wanted to help," Richard nodded. "That's exactly why it worked. You know, I've led this company for 15 years. I've hired consultants, experts, MBAs, people with perfect resumes. But none of them taught me as much about leadership as you did." Eli blinked. "Me? Yes," Richard said simply. "Because when everything fell apart, you didn't panic. You didn't need authority to take action. You just saw what needed to be done and did it." He leaned forward. "Someday you're going to run your own company. Maybe even build something bigger than Helix. But when that happens, remember this. Leadership isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's about seeing potential where others don't, even if that potential is hidden behind a janitor's uniform." Eli nodded, his chest tight with emotion. "I won't forget that, sir." "Good," Richard said, smiling. "Because I want you to help us design the next system. A fully adaptive AI monitoring framework. Real-time stability management. Think you're ready?" Eli grinned. "I've been thinking about it for weeks." Richard laughed. "Of course you have. That's what I like about you." That evening, Eli and his mother sat on the steps outside their apartment, a gentle summer breeze carrying the hum of the city around them. Maria watched the traffic lights flicker in the distance, her hands clasped around a mug of tea. "He offered you something big today, didn't he?" Eli looked at her surprised. "How'd you know?" "The mother knows when her child's thinking about something that makes his heart beat faster," she said with a small smile. He laughed quietly. "He wants me to help build something new, something bigger than eGuard." She nodded, her eyes soft. "And are you going to?" He hesitated. "I want to, but I also don't want people to think I got lucky. I want to earn it," Maria smiled. "You already did. Luck didn't keep you up all those nights studying. It didn't make you curious. That's all you." He was quiet for a long moment. "Mom? Yeah?" "When I walked into that office the first day, I felt like I didn't belong. Everyone looked at me like I was out of place." "I know," she said gently. "But now," he continued, "and when I walk in, they nod. They talk to me. They ask me for help. It feels different." Maria reached over and rested her hand on his. "That's because you earned their respect, Eli. Not because you changed who you are, but because you stayed exactly the same." He nodded slowly, her words sinking in. A week later, Helix hosted a small evening ceremony for their employees to celebrate the successful rollout of eGuard. The event was held in the same open atrium where, months earlier, people had panicked during the system crash. Now the space glowed with soft lights, laughter, and the sound of music. Richard stood on stage and tapped the microphone. "Tonight's about gratitude," he said. "We faced failure, and instead of falling apart, we found strength in each other. Most of all, we were reminded that brilliance isn't defined by titles or degrees. Sometimes it's the person no one expects who carries the answer." He gestured toward the back of the room. "Eli, come on up here." The room erupted into applause. Eli froze for a second, embarrassed, but Maria nudged him forward with a proud smile. He made his way to the stage, cheeks flushed. Richard handed him a small plaque engraved with his name. "To Eli Harris, for reminding us that talent, humility, and courage are the foundation of true innovation." The applause grew louder. Maria's eyes shimmered as she clapped, her heart full. When the noise finally died down, Richard looked toward her. "And to Maria Harris," he added, "who showed us that behind every remarkable person is someone who believed in them first." The crowd cheered again, and Maria covered her mouth, overwhelmed. Later that night, after most of the guests had gone home, Eli and his mother lingered in the empty lobby. The city lights reflected off the glass walls, bathing the room in a gentle gold glow. "Feels different, doesn't it?" she said softly. "Yeah," he replied. "It's like the world got bigger," she smiled. "It didn't get bigger, baby. You just started seeing more of it." They stood in silence for a while, both looking out at the skyline, the same skyline that once seemed unreachable. "Mom," Eli said finally, "thank you. For believing in me even when no one else did." Maria looked at him, her voice warm and steady. "That's easy to do when you see the world through your child's courage." As they left the building, the security guard at the front door smiled and held it open for them. "Good night, Miss Harris. Good night, Mr. Harris." Maria and Eli exchanged a quiet smile as they stepped out into the warm night air. The hum of the servers still echoed faintly from within the building, steady, constant, alive. The same sound that had once meant panic now meant promise, and as they walked down the quiet street together, mother and son side by side, it felt like the world had finally learned what Maria had always known, that brilliance doesn't come from privilege or position. It comes from curiosity, integrity, and the quiet courage to try.